The cold November rain beat mercilessly against the glass windows of Pennsylvania Station in New York City. The sky was a heavy, suffocating gray, casting a gloomy shadow over the thousands of rushing commuters. Among the sea of busy people stood 34-year-old Sarah Jenkins, her hands shaking as she tightly gripped the handle of a battered, duct-taped suitcase. Sarah wore a faded denim jacket that offered little protection against the damp chill, and her worn-out leather boots were soaked through. Her eyes, a beautiful but deeply tired shade of hazel, were red and puffy from hours of silent crying. Just 2 days ago, her life had completely shattered. Her husband of 8 years, Richard, had abruptly walked out on her and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily.
But the betrayal went far deeper than a broken marriage. Richard had secretly emptied their joint bank account, maxed out 3 credit cards in Sarah's name, and vanished with his young assistant, leaving Sarah with a pile of eviction notices and exactly $45 to her name. With no family left in New York and facing immediate homelessness, Sarah had no choice but to pack their lives into 2 bags and buy a one-way ticket on the Amtrak Northeast Regional train toward Boston, where a distant childhood friend had offered them a temporary couch to sleep on. Beside her, little Lily stood quietly, clutching a tattered plush rabbit named Barnaby. Lily was a sweet, highly imaginative child with big blue eyes and a crown of unruly golden curls. She wore a bright yellow raincoat that was missing its top button, a detail that broke Sarah's heart every time she looked at it, because she couldn't afford to replace it. Lily didn't fully understand the concept of divorce or bankruptcy. She only knew that her father hadn't come home for days, that her mother was constantly weeping in the dark kitchen, and that they were leaving their cozy apartment forever. The little girl shivered, pulling closer to Sarah's damp leg. Sarah looked down, forcing a brave, artificial smile onto her pale lips, while a knot of absolute terror tightened in her throat. She felt like a complete failure as a mother. She had always promised to protect her daughter from the harshness of the world, but now they were running away like fugitives into the freezing New England winter. As the loud, mechanical voice over the loudspeaker announced the boarding of the train to Boston, Sarah felt a sharp, sudden pain in her chest. A wave of panic so intense, the station began to spin around her. She closed her eyes, praying for the strength to just take the next step. But as she opened them and moved toward the track, she realized her purse was missing from her shoulder. Sarah's heart stopped. She gasped, frantically looking around the crowded, chaotic concrete platform. The purse contained their train tickets, Sarah's driver's license, and the precious $45 that was supposed to buy Lily food for the next week. Panic surged through her veins like ice water. She looked back at the bench they had just left, but it was completely empty. No, please, God, no, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking as hot tears finally spilled over her eyelashes, tracking through the light dust on her cheeks. Commuters bumped into her shoulders, grumbling and cursing as she stood frozen in the middle of the walking lane. Lily looked up, her blue eyes wide with sudden fear, sensing her mother's complete breakdown. Sarah dropped to her knees right there on the dirty, wet floor of Penn Station, burying her face in her trembling hands. She was completely stranded, utterly broke and entirely helpless in a city that felt like a concrete monster. But just as the first sob broke from her chest, a deep, incredibly calm voice spoke above her, asking if she had dropped something. Sarah slowly lifted her tear-stained face. Standing before her was a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine, completely out of place in the grimy station. He was tall, around 38, with broad shoulders and a powerful, commanding presence. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal wool overcoat, an expensive silk scarf, and his dark brown hair was styled with executive precision. His jawline was sharp, but his striking gray eyes were filled with an unexpected, deep warmth as he looked down at her. In his hand, He held Sarah's faded leather purse, which he had rescued from the wet ground near the ticket kiosk. This was Caleb Harrison, the billionaire founder and CEO of Harrison Tech Industries. Caleb was a man who possessed unimaginable wealth, power, and influence, controlling a global technology empire from his penthouse office in Manhattan. Yet, despite his immense success, Caleb's personal life was shrouded in a quiet, heavy loneliness. He had spent the last several years burying himself in his work, completely avoiding the superficial high society dating scene because he felt no one truly saw him for who he was. He was traveling to Boston by train today instead of his usual private helicopter, simply because he wanted a quiet afternoon away from the suffocating pressure of his board of directors.
Caleb extended his hand, his long, clean fingers steady as he helped Sarah rise from the damp floor. The moment Sarah's cold, trembling hand touched his warm palm, a strange, electric spark of comfort seemed to pass between them. Sarah quickly pulled her hand back, blushing deeply as she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket.
"Thank you," she stammered, her voice shaking with embarrassment. I don't know what I would have done. That bag has everything we have left."
Caleb looked at her tattered clothes, the cheap suitcase held together by tape, and then down at little Lily, who was staring up at him with innocent curiosity. Caleb's heart gave a strange, unfamiliar tug. He didn't see a homeless woman or a burden. He saw a mother fighting with every ounce of her soul to protect her beautiful child. He smiled gently at Lily, bowing slightly. "You're very welcome," Caleb said softly, his voice rich and soothing. "The boarding call is ending soon. You should get inside where it's warm." Sarah nodded quickly, picking up her heavy suitcase and guiding Lily toward coach car number 3. She felt a profound sense of relief as she stepped into the warm, carpeted interior of the train, the smell of old upholstery and coffee wrapping around her. The train was packed to maximum capacity due to the upcoming holiday weekend, and people were loudly fighting for overhead luggage space. Sarah slowly walked down the narrow aisle, searching for 2 open seats together. But every row was filled with sleeping travelers or couples. Finally, near the very back of the premium quiet car, she found a single open row with 2 empty seats directly across from a single passenger. Sarah quickly guided Lily into the window seat and hoisted her heavy suitcase into the bin above, her muscles aching from exhaustion. She collapsed into the aisle seat, letting out a long, ragged breath, believing the worst of the day was finally behind her. But as she turned her head to look across the small aisle, her eyes went wide with shock. Sitting directly across from her, reading a financial newspaper, was Caleb Harrison. Caleb looked up from his newspaper, his gray eyes lighting up with genuine surprise and pleasure when he realized who had sat next to him. He folded the paper neatly and placed it on the empty seat beside him. "It seems fate wants us to be neighbors for the next 4 hours," he said, with a warm, easy smile that instantly made Sarah's racing heart slow down just a bit. Sarah managed a small, genuine smile in return, though she still felt incredibly self-conscious about her appearance next to his obvious wealth. "I guess so," she replied softly. "I'm Sarah, by the way, and this is Lily." Lily, hearing her name, peeked out from behind her plush rabbit and gave Caleb a shy little wave. Caleb's smile widened, his entire demeanor softening in a way that would have shocked his ruthless corporate competitors. "It's an honor to meet you both. I'm Caleb." He didn't mention his last name, nor did he mention his billionaire status. He simply wanted to be a regular man, sharing a quiet conversation with a lovely woman. As the train gave a smooth, powerful lurch and began to glide out of the dark station into the pouring rain, a comfortable conversation began to bloom between Caleb and Sarah. The pacing was slow, gentle, and filled with an emotional realism that Sarah hadn't experienced in years.
Caleb asked simple, respectful questions about her journey, and Sarah, surprised by his genuine interest, found herself opening up. She didn't tell him the full, humiliating story of her husband's betrayal, but she admitted that they were moving to Boston to start completely over after a very difficult time.
Caleb listened with profound empathy, his eyes never leaving her face. He shared stories of his own childhood, growing up with a hard-working single mother who had sacrificed everything to put him through school, which was why he had such deep respect for Sarah's strength. He explained how he spent most of his life trapped in endless, cold corporate meetings, and how much he missed the simple, honest connections of life. Hours seemed to melt away as the train sped through the misty, gray landscapes of Connecticut. Lily, lulled by the gentle rocking of the train and the warm air, eventually yawned and curled up against Sarah's side, falling into a deep, peaceful sleep with her head on her mother's lap. Sarah gently stroked her daughter's golden curls, her eyes filled with an intense maternal devotion. Caleb watched them, a deep, unfamiliar ache blooming in his chest. For the first time in his life, he realized that all his billions of dollars meant absolutely nothing compared to the beautiful, raw love radiating from this struggling mother and child. He found himself deeply attracted to Sarah, not just for her natural, understated beauty, but for her incredible resilience, her kindness, and the fierce grace she maintained despite her obvious hardships. Sarah, too, felt a strange, beautiful hope rising within her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen, protected, and valued by this mysterious, gentle stranger. But just as she began to think that maybe, just maybe, the universe was giving her a second chance at happiness, the train conductor walked down the aisle, holding a tablet and looking directly at Sarah with a very stern expression.
The conductor stopped right next to Sarah's seat, clearing his throat loudly. He was a middle-aged man with a sharp, no-nonsense attitude. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet car. "We just processed the digital ticket scan for this row. It seems the credit card used to purchase your tickets online 2 days ago has been flagged as completely frozen and reported for fraudulent activity by the primary cardholder, a Mr. Richard Jenkins. Your tickets have just been officially canceled by the system." Sarah felt the blood completely drain from her face, her hands turning ice cold as she stared up at the conductor. "What? No, that's impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden sharp panic. "My husband, he bought them before he left. It's our only way to Boston." The conductor shook his head coldly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the system doesn't lie. The cardholder called the bank and canceled all transactions. If you cannot provide a valid alternative credit card right now to pay the full $300 walk-on fare for you and the child, I will have to ask you to step off the train at the next immediate stop, which is Stamford, Connecticut." Sarah felt a heavy, crushing wave of humiliation wash over her as several passengers in the car turned around to stare at her. She fumbled with her purse, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She knew she only had $45 in cash. There was no other card. Richard had intentionally tracked her purchase and canceled the tickets from afar. A final cruel act of malice to completely ruin her life and leave her stranded in the middle of nowhere. Tears of absolute despair welled in her eyes. "Please, sir," she begged in a frantic whisper, trying not to wake Lily. "It's freezing outside and my daughter is sleeping. I don't have another card. Please just let us stay until Boston." The conductor sighed, reaching for his radio. "Rules are rules, ma'am. I have to call the platform security at Stamford." Sarah felt a dark, suffocating abyss opening up beneath her, ready to swallow her and her child whole. She closed her eyes, completely defeated, ready to accept her miserable fate. "That won't be necessary." Caleb's deep authoritative voice.
"That won't be necessary." Caleb's deep, authoritative voice suddenly rang out, cutting through the tension like a razor. The conductor froze, looking over at Caleb. Caleb's gray eyes had turned into chips of ice, his face a mask of absolute, wealthy, commanding power. He pulled out a sleek black titanium credit card from his leather wallet and handed it directly to the conductor. "Charge the full fare to this card, along with a first-class upgrade for the ladies for the remainder of the journey. And if you speak to this woman with that disrespectful tone again, I will personally ensure you are looking for a new job by tomorrow morning." The conductor's eyes went wide as he read the name on the black card. Caleb Harrison.
The conductor's entire demeanor instantly changed, his face turning pale as he nervously nodded, processed the payment on his tablet, and handed the card back with a deep bow, quickly scurrying away down the aisle. Sarah stared at Caleb, a mixture of profound relief and deep embarrassment washing over her. "Caleb, I can't accept this," she whispered, a hot tear sliding down her cheek. $300. I don't know when I can ever pay you back." Caleb reached across the aisle, his warm hand gently covering hers for a brief second. "You don't owe me a single penny, Sarah," he said, his voice incredibly soft and tender. "No one should ever be treated like that, especially not someone as special as you." The train continued its journey, the tense atmosphere slowly melting back into a deep, comforting quiet. Sarah looked at Caleb, her heart swelling with an emotion so intense it frightened her. This wealthy, beautiful stranger had just saved her from total ruin twice in a single day, expecting absolutely nothing in return. As the train rolled past the dark, rain-soaked platform of Stanford without stopping, little Lily began to stir against Sarah's side. The little girl rubbed her big blue eyes, yawning loudly as she blinked against the soft lights of the train car. She looked around, her mind still foggy from sleep, and her eyes landed directly on Caleb, who was watching her with a warm, fatherly smile. Lily's face suddenly lit up with a pure, innocent joy. She scrambled off her seat, bypassed her mother's legs, and threw her little arms tightly around Caleb's neck, burying her face into his expensive wool coat. Sarah gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she reached out to pull her daughter back. "Lily, sweetie, no, come back here. Don't ruin his clothes," she whispered frantically. But before Sarah could touch her, Lily looked up into Caleb's gray eyes, her small voice ringing out clearly through the quiet car, filled with absolute certainty. "Daddy, you found us! I knew you would come save us from the bad storm." Sarah froze, her entire body turning to stone. The words echoed like a physical blow through the train car. Several passengers nearby gasped, turning around to look at the scene with wide, shocked eyes. Sarah's face turned from pale to a deep, burning crimson as a wave of absolute horror washed over her. Lily's father, Richard, had barely spent time with her during the last year, and in her 6-year-old mind, a father was supposed to be a strong, handsome protector who saved them when they were crying. Because Caleb had rescued them at the station and stood up for them against the conductor, Lily's innocent, longing heart had completely confused reality with her deepest wish. Caleb sat completely frozen, his arms hovering in the air around the little girl who was hugging him so tightly. A look of profound shock and confusion crossed his handsome features. Sarah felt a cold sweat break out across her neck. She realized how this must look to Caleb and everyone else in the car. It looked like a calculated, desperate trap. It looked like she was a manipulative, gold-digging woman who had trained her young daughter to target a wealthy man on a train and call him dad in public, to force him into a relationship or a financial handout. The beautiful, fragile emotional connection they had built over the last 3 hours suddenly felt like it was shattering into a million pieces.
Sarah saw the confusion in Caleb's eyes and assumed it was disgust and anger. Sick with humiliation, Sarah grabbed Lily by the waist, pulling her firmly back into her own seat. "Lily, stop it right now," Sarah sobbed, her voice cracking with pure agony. "He is not your father. He is a stranger who was just being nice to us. How could you say that?" Lily, shocked by her mother's sharp tone, burst into loud, frightened tears, burying her face into her plush rabbit. Sarah looked across the aisle at Caleb, her eyes wild with shame. "I am so sorry, Caleb. I swear to you I didn't plan this. She's just a confused, lonely little girl. Please don't think—" But before she could finish, Caleb's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he stood up from his seat without saying a single word, picked up his briefcase, and walked quickly down the aisle, disappearing into the next train car.
The remaining 2 hours of the train ride were a living nightmare for Sarah. The warm, beautiful connection that had filled her with hope had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, suffocating silence. The other passengers continued to cast judgmental, whispering glances at her, confirming her worst fears. They all believed she was a fraud. Lily wept quietly until she fell back into an exhausted, fitful sleep, her tiny hand clutching Sarah's thumb. Sarah sat staring out the window into the pitch-black New England night, tears quietly streaming down her face. She felt an anger at her ex-husband so intense it burned her throat, but mostly she felt a profound, aching grief for the loss of Caleb's respect. She had finally met a truly good man, a man who made her feel safe, and her broken life had driven him away in disgust. She felt completely stripped of her dignity. When the train finally screeched to a halt at South Station in Boston, the clock read nearly 9 o'clock in the evening. The rain had turned into a heavy, freezing slush that coated the city in a treacherous layer of ice. Sarah gathered her heavy, taped suitcase and woke Lily, guiding her shivering daughter down the metal steps of the train onto the crowded, cold platform. The station was vast, noisy, and confusing. Sarah pulled out her phone to call her childhood friend, Elena, who was supposed to pick them up. But as she clicked the screen, her heart sank into her stomach. The screen remained completely black. The battery was dead, and because Richard had canceled their phone plan that morning, she had no service anyway. Sarah stood in the middle of the bustling station, holding her crying child, completely unable to contact the only person who could save them from the freezing streets. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as the sheer weight of her exhaustion and despair threatened to pull her to the ground. Suddenly, a heavy, aggressive hand slammed onto Sarah's shoulder from behind, spinning her around with terrifying force. Sarah cried out in fear, nearly losing her balance on the slick concrete. Standing before her, a cruel, mocking sneer on his face, was Richard Jenkins. He was a slick-looking man in his late 30s, wearing an expensive leather jacket that Sarah had bought him for his last birthday. His eyes were bloodshot and angry, smelling faintly of alcohol. Next to him stood a sleek, expensive-looking woman in her 20s, holding several high-end shopping bags. Richard had used the money he stole from Sarah to fly to Boston for a luxury weekend getaway, completely unconcerned that his ex-wife and daughter were starving. "Wow, look what the cat dragged into Boston!" Richard laughed loudly, his voice drawing the attention of several onlookers. "I knew you'd crawl here to Elena's place, Sarah. You always were a pathetic, helpless loser who couldn't survive a single day without my money." Sarah backed away, pulling Lily behind her back, her body shaking with a mixture of intense fear and rising rage. "Richard, please leave us alone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You took everything. You left us with nothing. Just let us go." Richard took a menacing step forward,
his face twisting into a dark, furious scowl as he grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip tightening until she whimpered in pain. "Don't you dare play the victim with me, Sarah," Richard shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of the station. "I saw the bank alerts. You tried to use my credit card to buy train tickets. You're a thief, Sarah. And look at you, dragging my daughter around like a homeless vagrant in a dirty station. You're an embarrassment of a mother. I should call the police right now and have them take Lily away from you forever. You don't even have a place to sleep tonight." Lily began to scream in terror, tightly hugging Sarah's leg as she wept. "Daddy, stop! Leave Mommy alone! Daddy, please!" Richard didn't even look at his daughter. His eyes were focused entirely on breaking Sarah's spirit completely in public, enjoying the absolute power he held over her broken life. The surrounding crowd began to gather in a wide circle, murmuring nervously, but no one stepped forward to intervene in what looked like a dangerous domestic dispute. Sarah felt her knees buckling, the absolute terror of losing her daughter paralyzing her brain. She felt entirely alone, staring into the face of the villain who had destroyed her world. "Take your hands off her, right now!" The voice didn't just speak. It boomed through the entire station like a thunderclap, vibrating with a cold, lethal fury that made the entire crowd instantly fall completely silent. Richard froze, his grip on Sarah's arm loosening as he slowly turned his head. Striding through the crowd like an avenging angel, his charcoal coat flying behind him, was Caleb Harrison. But he wasn't alone. Flanked on either side of him were 4 large, uniformed Boston Transit police officers and a sharp-visaged man holding a heavy leather legal briefcase. Caleb's gray eyes were no longer warm. They were burning with a terrifying billionaire rage that could destroy empires. He walked straight up to Richard, his towering frame completely overshadowing the smaller man, and forced Richard to step away from Sarah. Caleb instantly stepped into the gap, placing his large, protective body between Sarah and her abusive ex-husband. He looked down at Sarah, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second as he checked her arm for bruises. "Are you all right, Sarah?" he asked, his voice deeply gentle. Sarah could only nod, her chest heaving with silent, grateful sobs as she realized Caleb hadn't left them because he was angry.
Richard, recovering from his initial shock, puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "Hey, who the hell do you think you are?" Richard snapped, pointing an arrogant finger at Caleb's chest. "This is private family business. This woman is my ex-wife, and that's my daughter. You have no right to interfere, buddy. So why don't you take your expensive coat and get the hell out of here before I call the cops on you?" Caleb didn't flinch. A cold, dangerous smile slowly spread across his handsome face. The smile of a man who was about to utterly obliterate a cockroach. Caleb leaned in close, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet rumble that carried to every single person in the crowd. "My name is Caleb Harrison, and you, Richard, are the one who is about to be arrested." The name Caleb Harrison echoed through the crowd, causing an immediate wave of loud whispers and gasps. Richard's face instantly lost all of its color, his mouth dropping open as he looked at the man standing before him. Even in his bubble of arrogance, Richard knew exactly who Caleb Harrison was. The multi-billionaire tech titan who practically owned half of the major real estate and financial markets on the East Coast. Richard's slick assistant quickly stepped back, trying to hide her expensive shopping bags behind her back, her eyes wide with terror as she realized they had just crossed paths with one of the most powerful men in America. Caleb Harrison? Richard stammered, his confidence evaporating into a pathetic, sweating panic. "Mr. Harrison, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. This woman, she's unstable. She stole my money, "Silence!" Caleb barked, the sheer power of his command making Richard jump backward.
Caleb's personal attorney stepped forward, opening the leather briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of certified legal documents and digital printouts. "Mr. Jenkins," the attorney stated in a cold, precise voice that sounded like a judge delivering a sentence, "while you were enjoying your train ride, my employer had his corporate security firm conduct a full forensic financial audit on your recent business and personal accounts. We have already obtained the certified bank records from New York showing that you illegally embezzled over $85,000 from a joint account using a forged signature, and that you intentionally committed identity theft by opening 3 fraudulent credit lines under Sarah Jenkins' social security number."
Richard began to tremble violently, looking wildly around the circle of police officers who were now closing in on him, their hands resting firmly on their handcuffs.
No, that's a lie. It was a marital asset. You can't prove anything," Richard yelled, his voice cracking with desperation.
The attorney smiled coldly, pulling out a tablet. "We also have the IP tracking data from your phone, showing that you intentionally and maliciously canceled this woman's paid transit tickets while she was en route, with the specific intent to strand a minor child in a storm. The District Attorney of New York has already reviewed this evidence over the last hour, courtesy of Mr. Harrison's personal recommendation. A federal warrant for grand larceny, fraud, and identity theft has just been officially issued in your name." The head police officer stepped forward, grabbing Richard roughly by his arms and spinning him around, slamming him against a cold concrete pillar. "Richard Jenkins, you are under arrest," the officer stated firmly, clicking the heavy steel handcuffs around Richard's wrists.
The crowd instantly erupted into loud cheers and applause, watching the villain weep and beg as he was dragged away in disgrace down the station corridor, his life completely ruined by the very cruelty he had inflicted on his family. The chaotic crowd slowly dispersed, leaving the station platform quiet once again. The freezing slush continued to fall outside, but inside, a profound, beautiful peace had finally arrived. Sarah stood holding Lily, her tears now completely a mixture of overwhelming relief, joy, and deep gratitude. She looked at Caleb, her hazel eyes shining with a raw emotional realism. "Caleb, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You didn't leave because you were mad at us." Caleb stepped closer, his face filled with an immense tenderness as he looked down at her. "Sarah, when your beautiful daughter called me Dad on that train, it didn't make me angry. It broke my heart because I realized how deeply she needed a real protector and how much you have been suffering alone. I only left that car because I knew I needed to use every resource I had to protect you from whatever monster made you feel so safe with a stranger. I promised myself I wouldn't come back to you until I had removed that threat from your life forever." Lily reached out her small hands, and this time, Sarah didn't stop her. Caleb gladly took the little girl into his arms, holding her close against his broad chest. Lily smiled happily, wiping a stray tear from Caleb's cheek with her tiny finger. "I told you, Mommy," Lily whispered happily. "He's our hero." Caleb looked from the little girl to Sarah, his gray eyes burning with a deep, permanent devotion. "Sarah, you don't have to go to that couch in Boston. You don't ever have to run or be afraid again. I have a beautiful, warm home, and I want nothing more than to share it with you and Lily. I want to help you rebuild your life at whatever pace you need." Sarah felt the last of the heavy, suffocating weight of the past year melt away from her soul. She reached out, her hand sliding perfectly into Caleb's warm palm, knowing that her long, painful storm was finally over. Together, the three of them walked out of the station into the crisp winter air,
stepping into a waiting car that would take them toward a beautiful new life filled with hope, justice, and a love that would last forever.